But what was kind of your spark to have your post recently on immigration? What's kind of your general stance on it so far now that we're a week and a half in?
Yeah, so it's funny. I've gotten a few messages saying I'm not allowed to have an opinion because I'm a white conservative, which is sort of funny because I feel like that same argument is used about abortion. Not allowed to have an opinion if you're a man. So it's interesting that the logic is not logicking there.
Sure.
But yeah, so my post was trying to share the church's teaching on immigration, and people don't like facts. So it's not my opinion that the catechism says that, and I didn't actually write the catechism. I was just trying to share what was in there and what the church says. And in her wisdom, right, she doesn't separate reason from, I don't want to say emotions, but the head and the heart, right? The church is really, really good at balancing those perfectly. We don't always carry it out perfectly, but the teaching balances it perfectly, right? So people really lean too far one way or the other. And I would even say some conservatives are too far. Like, I'm not for going into a school and pulling kids out in the middle of a school day kind of situation like they're talking about. I think the issue is we don't just take like a second and be like, what's actually happening? Like you said, what actually happened during that time when we were hearing there were so many deportations? And the media has us in a state of constant frenzy, of one thing or another. And this is just an easy target. But one thing I would point to is that the majority of Hispanics that are here legally voted for Trump. So it's interesting that they would do that if he's just like so anti, immigrant, doesn't want any of them here. It's also bad for them to have an influx of unchecked migrants come in that we don't know where they're from. They're taking, a lot of them are getting paid under the table. So they're taking jobs. So it's just interesting to me to note that the legal immigrants don't want them here either. It's not, this isn't like just some privileged person that's from America saying that, like that they voted for Trump and knowing that was his plan. So the biggest frustration for me is just that he is going after criminals that are very obviously criminals, lots of convictions and things like that. And they're talking about he's going to come to your house and take your granny. I heard some saying that on their podcast, and it's just like, that's not how this is working. Now, do I think that it's actually a difficult topic to say, like, I'm not sure I'm for like round up everybody who didn't come here and their children, they've been here 3 generations now, right? Like, I think it's a little bit hard to say like, hey, you've never lived there, you didn't come here on your own, we're going to round you up and take you back. So I think there's some room for discussions on those kind of things and like common sense things, but it is common sense to say you have to have a border, you have to stop the bleeding, and you have to send violent criminals back where they came from. I think those are like fairly common sense things. But of course, because Trump says them, we all have to lose our minds about it.
You have to hate that. That was kind of my other point in the barbershop was you can kind of tell where somebody's at on almost every social issue, right? There's some level of just extremism where you can just say like, this is the threshold that if we don't at least agree on this, not saying like, I think you should be burned at the stake. There's certain people that say like, if we don't agree on certain things, even they're extreme, then I'm like, I have to hate you. I don't think that's the case, but I think there's a certain level of extremism where it's like, okay, you're not reasonable on this. Like, you're not being rational. And to me, deporting criminals, especially people convicted or arrested for violent crimes, for sexual crimes, like there should be zero tolerance for that. Like just 0% tolerance for people who are committing crimes, who've already committed a crime to come here and then are committing crimes once here. Just the fact that, you have so many Democrats that are voting against that in Congress, or people who are actually taking it, are actually against that stance. You can really, again, kind of go back. One of the easy ways to kind of find that threshold, whether it's abortion, whether it's immigration, whether it's, LGBTQ stuff, is just go back to like where Democrats were in like the 2000s, right? It's a great way to just say, okay, if like Hillary was saying it in 2008, then it doesn't mean that it's good. But it's like that can at least be the cutoff. Like if she was a strong advocate for it, just like, abortion should be safe, legal, and rare, could be a good segue to some of the stuff RFK is saying in his hearings this week. But I just think that that's a kind of threshold that says like, okay, do we at least agree, Hillary is all for criminal illegal immigrants being sent back to their countries. Like, do you at least agree on that? And if somebody's like, no, like everybody should be able to stay, like we're a country of immigrants. It's like, all right, then it's not worth really having the conversation.
Yeah. And that's something too, is like there is a reasonable prudence of like, is this conversation worth having? But I find that some people have just really never heard any other side of the story, right? I mean, that's just, especially if you live in the very online world, you're going to hear a lot of crazy things and you just hear them repeated a lot. And then people don't talk about them in the real world very often because they're worried about getting stigmatized one way or another. So they just don't talk about it. But yeah, I think you make a great point. Trump's really not that conservative. He's
Right.
he's an old school Democrat is what he is. And like, we're just like all over here raving about it because it's been so bad, but it's better than what we had. It's just reasonable, common sense things. So, you brought this up when we were chatting before that Obama deported more people than Trump did in his first term, but
100%.
nobody wants to talk about that. So,
Yep. Yeah. That's often forgot fact that Obama was known by a lot of people as the deporter in chief back in the day. I think a lot of illegal immigrants or people who were just coming here. It's pretty crazy to think about. I actually pulled this up here from, what is this website? ABC7. So this is just like this is a recent article. It's actually written. You can see up top here, January 27th. So just 2 days ago, as of our recording, this was released. It just kind of gives you like a little summary. According to ICE, these are the on the ground facts. It says, Immigration agency says it arrested 956 people nationwide on Sunday, over 1,000 on Monday, and more than 3,400 since Trump took office 1 week ago. Over the last 20 years, immigrant removal spiked at 432,000 in 2013 under President Obama. In his busiest year, Trump never even hit that. Trump has even broken Obama's record. And think about that. Like, Trump really wants to. He probably will this presidency. But it's just amazing to me to think that not even Obama, to think like, not Obama in 2009. Like, this was the beginning of his second term, that it spiked, which is pretty amazing to see that. And even Biden, the Biden administration at 329 in 2024, the most of his term, presumably trying to clean it up, right? Election year. And they know that this is a hot button issue. Kamala Harris was seen as the border czar. She was named the border czar by the Biden administration and the mainstream media. And then they tried to pull that back and rope that one back in after she did a miserable job with it. But you can see 329,000 in 2024, his most, and Trump's most in his first presidency was 347. That's less than 20,000 off. I don't know the percentage of that, but what would that be?
Yeah, I mean, it's not far off.
7% difference.
I think you're right that he will beat that, but I think sort of like inflation, right? There's a whole lot more to beat now, right? Like we did not have the level of immigration that we have had over the past 4 years, and people that we've just lost that we don't, know even where they are or anything like that. So I think he will beat it, but just because of sheer numbers of what was coming through the border.
Yeah, I think that's right. He has much more opportunity.
That's right. That's right.
It's kind of like Biden was able to be the jobs president because he came in at the tail end of COVID, right? He just had seized the opportunity that was there by hampering down the economy and then bringing it back.
Yeah, I read somewhere that something like 60% of the jobs added while he was president were government jobs. So,
oh wow,
I'm not sure. That stat is accurate. He brought a lot of jobs, but I think it was over 50% of the jobs were government jobs, which is basically just meaning like, did we create those jobs or are our taxes just paying more government employees? So
right. Or is this just kind of fake? But I want to get into, so you made a really good point here with your post talking about just kind of the appeal that you see so many Christians making, right? I think your post had a Protestant pastor, wasn't it? On the front?
I don't know. He's a reverend of some kind.
Yeah, let me look here. Yeah, Reverend Benjamin Creamer. It kind of looks like he's a Protestant guy.
Yeah,
but this quote you pull from him: "When we Christians are more known for our support of presidents than we are for our support of the poor, the immigrant, the marginalized, and the oppressed. That is when we know we are following someone other than Jesus, and we have a lot of repenting to do." What's most frustrating to me, and I shared a tweet that kind of talked about this, I think it was from Eric Sammons, talking about the many letters we're receiving from bishops. There's a lot of bishops' councils from different states that are coming together, and there are bishop conferences from different states that are coming together to unite on these letters condemning the deportations. And my favorite tweet, the reason why I love this tweet so much is he was like, all these years, 4 years of Biden pushing for abortion, Biden pushing, transgenderism into schools and promoting LGBTQ policies and all this stuff, hampering down on religious liberties. Like, where do we see the letters against that, right? Occasionally you'd see like individual bishops. I know there was like the Colorado bishops at one point put out a letter on abortion, but that was more of like a state issue when we were voting for it or against it. And you didn't see that as much from the USCCB or these like so many bishops who were outraged during the last 4 years, but now suddenly Cardinal Cupich is really loud now again. Now that Trump's back in office, and so that I found really frustrating. But wanted to give you some opportunity to share a little bit about some of the research you did there, and just to kind of I kind of break it down to two main things. But what does the church actually teach, and what you pull from the catechism? I was pulling previously from the USCCB, so it was even better to see you're kind of pulling from the catechism there on immigration.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing which we get lost on is that we actually, and I'll just read this from the catechism. It says, the political community has a duty to honor the family, to assist it, and to ensure especially the right to private property, to free enterprise, to obtain work and housing, and the right to emigrate. Which emigrate with an E means you have the right to leave your country if those things are not available to you. That does not inherently give you the right to enter another specific country, right? Now, there are ways to do that. You know, we do have a system in place. I think there's a big argument to be made for the fact that legal immigration system is not good to come into our country either, which is why a lot of people skip it. Because I do know people who have come here legally and it's very expensive and it takes a really long time and all those things. So like, I think it's good to have a process in place. I don't think ours is great. I'm not going to pretend to have the answer for how we fix all of that. I think it's a longer process than, you know, right now. But if you look at that, what that says in there also, the right to private property, to free enterprise, to obtain work and housing, that also means for us, like here in this country, like this isn't, not every other country are the countries that emigrate. Now, that is usually what happens, but you have that same right in your country, right? So like, what happens then when they're taking those things, when they're on your private property and those sorts of things? So I find when you break this down to a micro level and ask people like, hey, do you want them in your house? It changes really quick. Nobody wants to like change anything that they're doing. They just want somebody else to take care of it. And I heard
Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah, exactly. I heard a really great, like, I can't remember what podcast I heard this on, but they were basically just saying that if we live in a culture where we expect the government to take care of it, right? So we're like, that's a bad thing. The government should do something. Whereas true Christian charity would be like, that's a bad thing. What can I do about it? Right. And so if your first thought is like, why isn't the government fixing this? Then that just means you've gone off the rails, because the principle of subsidiarity is at the lowest possible level, right? And for us, the lowest possible level is the people that we know. How can we help in some sort of way? And so I do think there are opportunities out there for that. But most of us are just like, hey, we don't like that. What's the government going to do about it? So I think we start off with the wrong thought process. And I actually think the U.S. bishops are doing that to some extent. It's like, hey, we don't like what the government is doing here. So we're going to write these letters, et cetera. But like, what are you doing about it? And what they are doing about it is funneling money through Catholic charities. So we can talk about that if you want.
Yeah.
But in 2023, I don't think there are finalized numbers for 2024 yet. But 2023, $155 million went to just the generic like Catholic charities in the United States for migrant services. And that does not count any of the local chapters, which are really hard to track just because it gets down to like, you know, they're sending money to this diocese and that diocese. So it's hard to get a final number, but just 155 million just to the general Catholic charities specifically for migration services. And then I follow his name is Todd Bensman, and he works really closely on a lot of this stuff going down into South America to these camps and things where they're bringing people through. A lot of these camps are run by Catholic charities, and they are funneling cartels and children and etc. through these camps that the federal government's money is going to through Catholic charities through the USCCB. So it's a whole mess there. But my basic thing with that is if you're getting government money, you get government strings, right? And so this is super unpopular opinion, but I don't think that I would give up our 501c3 status as a church to not be tied to like what the government's telling us to do. I think that like we're just never going to get out of their clutches, for lack of a better term, until we're not taking money from them. And we're not, the bishops are not willing to say they're not going to cut off the money. So that's a whole other unfortunate topic, because we are meant to be, churches were the original charity, right? It wasn't the government, it was churches, and we are meant to do that. And I think something that gets lost in here is nobody's arguing that we shouldn't treat these people with dignity, right? Like every human has dignity. It doesn't matter where you are, even what crime you've committed, right? Like there is human dignity, but you do give up some of those rights or some of those things, by your actions. Actions have consequences, right? So I don't think anybody's arguing for like, they're acting like
Any criminal does.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Legal or illegal. And that's another thing, I guess, by definition, they're all here illegally. Right. So there is a crime being committed. Now you could argue the seriousness and whether it's really asylum and all that stuff, but every country has laws for immigration. Every country. Some of us are ignoring them right now, but every country does, because otherwise you don't have a country. It's as simple as that. Right. So yeah, it is frustrating. They managed to speak out on certain things. And I could even tie that in a little bit to, I was listening to the JFK or RFK Jr. hearings today. And, they've painted him as like a psychopath.
Right.
And I'm a self-proclaimed crunchy mom, I guess. But, when you start digging into all of this stuff that is just the norm for our kids. And, when I was a kid, I think it was like 24 shots by the time you were 18. Now it's something like 87 or 90, somewhere around there, that kids will, of these vaccine shots. And so, in my opinion, what RFK Jr. is saying is, hey, let's do more testing, because they haven't been tested. And everyone is acting like he's anti-vax, which he really isn't. He wants more tested. I would say I would classify myself as anti-vax, but I don't think he is. But where I'm going with this is that the USCCB, in the majority of dioceses across the country, even though the USCCB has put out a letter saying this is a matter of conscience, particularly because many of them contain aborted fetal cells. And if you don't believe me, go look at it at the website. It's cogforlife.org, childrenofgodforlife.org. And they have traced every single vaccine back to the fetal cells that it was created with. They don't all have them, but any that do, they've traced them back to. And so the USCCB put out a letter saying, it's a matter of conscience. You do not have to do this for various reasons, but that is one of them. And then the majority of dioceses in our country do not allow religious exemptions for Catholic schools. So, it's another, and the main reason that I can gather from people who have spoken to their bishops is it's a liability issue. They're concerned about the government pulling the money from their schools if they start to have outbreaks and things like that. And so it just keeps coming back to government money, right? So, and I think you would get a whole lot more donations from people if you did pool the government money that they're concerned about losing.